right, yep, it's Uncle Lou here. That's right, it is me, Uncle Lou, live on YouTube for you. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate it also. And two, in addition to that as well, make sure you subscribe to the channel if you're not already. I post pointless, barely watchable college football videos like this one year-round, almost every single day. We do call-in shows every Tuesday and Thursday night, live streams all day Saturdays during the season. We have a really good time. Come be a part of the community. College football season now just, 4 days away? Jeez, is that true? 4 days away. Yesterday, I did a video on some teams that I feel like could be trending up over the next 5 years versus their performance in the previous 5. And today, I want to do the opposite of that. I want to talk about some teams that I think could be trending down over the next 5 years versus where they've been at in the previous 5. And just a reminder, just like I pointed out on yesterday's trending up video, I'm not talking about necessarily teams who have finished in the top 5 for a couple of years and now they're going to be finishing number 8 or number 9. I'm talking about more of a significant decline or downward trend. Something noticeable, quantifiable, tangible, that kind of thing. Significant, in this case, drop off, because it's a trending down video. So yesterday for the trending up teams, we talked potentially Miami, Nebraska, Tennessee, Texas A&M, Auburn, Virginia Tech. I mean, these are teams that have mostly finished unranked a lot of times in the last 5 years. Now, a couple of those teams have had a good year or two within that 5-year period, but generally have not been a top 20 team over the last 5 years, and I think potentially could be top 20 teams, and in a lot of cases could potentially make some playoffs over the next 5 years in that list. So we're looking for something similar here. Maybe teams that have been finishing in the top 5, top 10 multiple times over the last 5 years. Maybe they've won some conference championships over the last 5 years or made even some playoffs over the last 5 years, and now we're going to a 12-team playoff. So, not only are they not finishing in the top 4 to make a playoff, but potentially not even being in a top 12 to make the playoff, or not winning any more conference championships during the next 5 years, whatever. Just a significant downward trend. I really can only come up with 2 that I'm that kind of fit that criteria. Feel free to let me know down below what kind of teams you think are heading on a downward trend over the next 5 years versus the previous 5. Keeping in mind, I'm looking for significant drop-offs here. The first one seems kind of obvious because I've been talking about it for a while, but it's the Clemson Tigers. You can make an argument that Clemson was the best program in college football from 2018 to 2019. They were winning the ACC every year. They were making the college football playoffs every year. They made multiple national championship games. They won 2 national championship games in 2016 and 2018. They had 2 all-time great players at the quarterback position, basically back-to-back in Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence. Great defenses, all kinds of players put into the NFL. Just one of the, if not the best programs in college football during the second half of the 2010s. Now, Alabama was still sort of at the top of their game, too, during that time period, which really makes what Clemson did even that much more impressive because they beat Alabama multiple times during that span. Then you had the COVID year. You come out of the COVID year, you got NIL, you got transfer portal sort of just starting to take off. And for reasons that we've been over a million times on this channel already, Dabo Swinney has been one of the only coaches in the country, definitely the most adamant coach in the country, that we're not really jumping into that. Specifically the transfer portal. They do have an NIL program at Clemson, and the Clemson fans themselves can argue amongst themselves about how they think Clemson and Dabo are handling NIL in terms of who gets it, recruits versus existing players, or whatever the case. What can't be argued is sort of the transfer portal and Dabo's unwillingness to use it. And what also can't be argued, in my opinion, is the negative effect that has had on Clemson as a program over the last 2 to 3 years. And again, this is something I've talked about a lot on this channel over the last really year and a half. Another transfer cycle window has come and gone without Clemson signing a single transfer player. In fact, they were the only FBS team in the country, other than the service academies, who can't take transfers, that did not sign at least one transfer in this most current cycle. And some of those effects, I believe, are already tangible. You already can see some of the effects of that. But because Clemson was, like I mentioned, one of, if not the best programs in all of college football prior to those changes, the drop-off, it's not that it hasn't been noticeable. It has been noticeable, but they are still at a very high level in the world of college football. In fact, when you look at their records over the last 5 years, and I'll pull that up now, last year was the worst year that they have had. You got to go back to 2011. Clemson went 9-4 last year, so 4 losses. They hadn't lost 4 games in a season since 2011, so it had been a long time. So 9-4 last year. The year before that, 11-3. 11-3 is really, really good, but not compared to where they were in 2015 and 2020, basically. So you already can see some drop off, but here's the thing. When you're at the top of the college football world, there's nowhere to go but down. You're either going to win every national title from now to the end of time, or you're going to drop off a little bit. This drop-off has not been significant. Now, you can make the case that last year was a pretty significant drop-off. I mean, they lost 4 games. They got blown out by Duke. They were completely out of the playoff picture before the calendar ever turned to October. Last year, that was a bad year. These previous years, Clemson, in some cases, was playing for the ACC title, winning the ACC title, New Year's 6 games, whatever. So they haven't been bad. They haven't been where they were, but they haven't been bad. But I'm worried that this sort of micro trend that we've seen with Clemson over the last couple of years, getting a little bit worse, is going to begin to snowball as other teams continue to improve every single year via the portal, while Dabo and Clemson bury their head in the sand and pretend it doesn't exist. So just to run through their win totals here, 9, 11, 10, 10, 14. That goes all the way back to 2019. So this is covering a 5-year period. So in 2019, they were 14-1. Their only loss, I believe, was in the national championship game. 2020 was the COVID year. That was an odd year for everybody. You can kind of throw that year out in terms of calculating total wins per year, but they were 10-2. I think they won the ACC that year, lost in the first round of the playoffs, I believe, or maybe the second. It might have been the national, was it championship game? No, I think they lost. Anyway, made the playoffs. 2021, 10-3. So here you're starting to see a little bit of a trend in the wrong direction already, right? 2018, 15-0, won the national title. 2019, 1 loss. 2020, 2 losses. 2021, 3 losses. 2022, 3 losses again. But they were winning 10, 10, and 11 games in those 3 years, 2020, 2021, 2022. 10 wins, 11 wins. Yes, the losses are increasing from 0. Again, nowhere to go but up, but from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3 to 3. And then you had 2023 last year, which I do think legitimately was a bad season considering the talent and sort of the coaching staff that Clemson have put together and things like that, and their competition. There's no reason they should get blown out by Duke 28-7, 9-4. So you look at these last 5 years here, you see ACC championships, you see trips to the playoffs. You see multiple 10-plus win seasons, right? As far as total number of wins go, 9 plus 11 is 20, plus 10 is 30, plus 10 is 40, plus 14 is 54. 54 wins. A lot of wins. 54 wins in the last 5 years. That's about 10.5 wins a season. Again, this goes all the way back to 2019 when they went 14-1. So that's skewing the number way up, right? 14 wins, 10 wins, 10 wins, 11 wins, 9 wins, 54 wins total over the last 5 years, almost 10.5 wins per season. So again, the purpose of this video, right? Teams trending down the next 5 years versus what they've done in the previous 5. So in the case of Clemson, we're starting with a baseline of 10.5 wins. You think Clemson's going to average 10.5 wins over the next 5 years? I don't. I do think they're headed in the wrong direction because of the reasons we already talked about. Do you think they're going to win multiple ACC championships over the next 5 years? Probably not. Florida State has clawed itself out of the gutter. Miami appears poised to finally be the Miami program that people have been waiting 20 years for them to be in the ACC. They've added in SMU, who I think will become a perennial good team in the ACC. Don't know that they'll become great or anything, but it's another additional hurdle, I think, for somebody like a Clemson to potentially have to get past within the ACC. NC State, again, 8-9 wins every single year. Will they ever figure out the double-digit formula? We'll see. Some people are high on them this year. Virginia Tech looks like they might be about to re-emerge as a contender in the ACC. Again, a team that's been almost forgettable for about 15 years. I don't think Clemson is going to have the success over the next 5 years that they've had in the previous 5. I don't see it. In fact, I'm not convinced Dabo Swinney will be the coach at Clemson in 5 years. I don't think he'll get fired. I think he's built up too much clout and credibility at Clemson for that to happen. But I could see one of these, mutual decisions that we sometimes hear about. Think Bobby Bowden at Florida State, right? We all know, really, Bobby Bowden was pushed out the door. They weren't going to announce that they were firing him. They weren't going to hold some kind of press conference where the AD comes out and says, this is his last year. We've done told him he's got to go. We're promoting Jimbo. That's it. Like, that was never going to happen with a guy like Bobby Bowden. All those sorts of talks and negotiations and decisions and agreements and all that were going to happen behind closed doors out of respect for what Bobby Bowden had done for such a long time at Florida State. And I can see a scenario where a similar thing goes on at Clemson. Or I can also see a scenario where Dabo just sits back and goes, you know what? I don't need this. I think things should be done a certain way. I don't believe in the direction that college football is headed. I don't like where we're at now versus where we were at 2 or 3 years ago. I don't like this change and that change. And based on everything that's changed in the last couple of years, I can only imagine what it's going to look like 2 or 3 years down the road. I've won multiple national titles. I've solidified myself as one of the best coaches, probably the best coach in Clemson history, one of the best coaches in the ACC, maybe a top 10 or 15 head coach of all time in college football. I'm out. I'm done. I'm walking away. I could see something like that happening. In other words, I guess the bottom line on that is I'm not convinced Dabo will be the coach at Clemson 5 years down the road. And I don't think Clemson is going to be as good and dominant over the next 5 years as we've seen them be over the previous 5 and really over the previous 10. To me, it's pretty obvious the direction that they're headed. And what's got to make it so frustrating for Clemson fans is that the reasons are obvious too. And it's not something that can't be controlled or fixed. This isn't a situation where you're coaching at Vandy and you just don't have the resources. The administration just won't give you the money you need for this new facility or this recruiting budget or to hire this staffer or whatever. None of that is the case at Clemson. Dabo has everything he wants, and everything that he may potentially want is available to him if he just asks for it there. And he's just refusing to sort of evolve in the new world of college football. And I'm not even saying that to suggest that, that's somehow wrong of Dabo to do that. If he's principled in such a way that he's just dead set against the sort of college football model that we're in now and we appear to be heading to over the next few years, if he's sort of dead set in his sort of morals and principles that that's just not the right way to do it, I'm not going to come on here and tell him he's wrong for feeling that way or for thinking that. I am going to suggest that it's going to cost Clemson wins. You can point to a lot of things, really, as far as why did Florida State surpass Clemson last year as sort of the dominant team and potentially the dominant program in the SEC going forward. But you cannot ignore the impact that the transfer portal has had in sort of the changing of the guard within the ACC. Florida State has went hard into the transfer portal and succeeded. Not only are they going into the portal and just getting a bunch of guys to fill roster spots. No, they're getting... Let me ask you that. If you're a Clemson fan, do you think you would have... How much better do you think you would have been last year with a Keon Coleman catching passes rather than the 2 or 3... honestly, nobody's that none of us can even name that you did have? Well, Florida State, who was already pretty good to start with, went out and added a Keon Coleman through the transfer portal. They added a Jaheim Bell at tight end through the transfer portal. They added multiple defensive starters through the transfer portal. On top of recruiting well. It's not an either-or scenario. No one, myself included, is suggesting that Dabo should take the Dion approach and just forsake high school recruiting altogether and sign 30 transfers a year. No. But even if you look at the teams that recruit at the absolute top of the top year in and year out, Georgia, Bama, Ohio State, Michigan, whatever teams you want to name in the top 5 or 6 in recruiting every single year, which Clemson has never been a part of, by the way. Even those teams are busy using the portal, year in and year out. Something like 4 of the last 6 Heisman winners were portal transfer players. One of Alabama's best players a couple of years ago, Jamison Williams, a portal player. They're Ohio State, absolutely loaded to start with. Then they go out and get an All-American safety out of the portal in Caleb Downs and one of the best running backs in the SEC out of the portal, Quinshon Judkins. You cannot stand still when it comes to the portal, or you will get passed by teams that are below you. Clemson and Florida State is a prime example of that, and it's got to drive the Clemson fans crazy. I think Clemson is headed downhill over the next 5 years versus what we've seen in the last 5. And the second one I want to talk about, and again, I could really only come up with 2 legitimate ones here. Feel free to let me know some additional teams down in the comments that you think might be trending down next 5 years. But the Michigan Wolverines, let's be honest, things can't go much better for Michigan the next 5 years than they've gone the last 5. And obviously, in particular, the last 3, right? 3 straight wins over Ohio State, 3 straight Big Ten titles, 3 straight trips to the playoffs, and a 15-0 national title season last year. It just can't get much better than that. Now, I know this is a 5-year look back versus the next 5 years. So even if you want to go back 4 and 5 years with Michigan, in the 4th year, that was COVID. You can throw that out. They were 2 and 4. They weren't very good. They were terrible. Half their team quit. It was a complete giant mess, but they were 2 and 4 in the COVID year. But the year before that, in 2019, they were 9 and 4. The year before that, they were 10 and 3. This has been a double-digit win team basically for a decade at this point, going all the way back to 2014 when they were 5 and 7. But since then, that was Brady Hoke's last year. They brought Jim Harbaugh in, 10 wins, 10 wins, 8 wins, 10 wins, 9 wins, 2 and 4 in the COVID year, 12 wins, 13 wins, 15 wins. Like Clemson from 2015 to 2020, there's not much Michigan can do to get better over the next 5 years versus what they've done in the previous 5. But I think it's more than that when it comes to Michigan and projecting or predicting what they might do or look like over the next 5 years. Obviously, Jim Harbaugh is gone. Tuck tail, ran from the NCAA, back off to the NFL, now the head coach of the Chargers. Took a lot of the coaching staff with him. Sharon Moore, who was named interim head coach for 6 games last year because Jim Harbaugh was suspended for 6 games last year, the first 3 games of the regular season by the Big Ten, and the last 3 games of the the first 3 games of the regular season, he was suspended by his own school, Michigan. The last 3 games of the regular season, he was suspended by his own conference, the Big Ten. Sharon Moore has that experience as interim head coach. He's now becomes permanent head coach. But there's just a lot of combining factors here with Michigan that is causing me to put them on this list. And I want you to keep in mind before you get mad at me if you're a Michigan fan, I think Michigan's going to be really good this year. Again, this is a 5-year look ahead period. I'm not talking specifically about this season. I think Michigan can make the playoffs this year. I think they're probably going to lose a couple of games depending on what happens with Texas early in the season. But I still think they have potential to get into a 12-team playoff this year. So I'm not specifically talking about this year. But when you look at Michigan, there's a combination of factors that appear to be hovering and circling and about to come crashing down on Michigan's head. First is just the loss of veteran talent and experience from last year's team, mostly on the offensive side of the ball. A lot of the defense returns. I think the defense will be really good again, and I think they're going to have a good ground game this year, too. I've got some questions about their quarterback, but we'll see. The divisions are gone within the Big Ten, right? So now instead of basically having to worry about Ohio State and maybe Penn State to a lesser degree, you've got Southern Cal, you've got Oregon, you've got Washington. These are all teams that have proven they can be pretty good and you sort of legitimate foes down the road. I think Michigan's path could get a little harder in terms of the regular season. And we just can't ignore the obvious, which is potential looming NCAA sanctions. Now, we don't know what they may end up being or what effect they may end up having. It could be fines. It could be postseason bans. It could be reduction of scholarships. It could be more coaching suspensions. It could be a whole number of things. But the point is, there is a lot going on around the Michigan football program that's not related to football in terms of NCAA investigations and everything else that's going on. I think Ohio State, although they've lost to Michigan 3 years in a row, that's really the only hurdle they failed to get over. I think they're an absolutely loaded team. Now, they were loaded the last 3 years, too, and Michigan beat them. I'm not taking anything away from Michigan in regards to those 3 wins over Ohio State. But do you think Michigan's beating Ohio State for the next 3 years in a row? I don't. So that right there would be one sort of step towards the downward trend. Michigan has won the Big Ten 3 years in a row. You think they're winning it the next 3 years? I don't. I think that's probably a downward trend there. Do you think they're making the playoffs the next 3 years in a row? No, I don't. I think they, with a 12-team playoff, I think they could make it once or twice, maybe even this year. All 3 years? No. Do I think they're going undefeated and winning a national title in the next 3 years? No. I think it's more likely Michigan is looking at a couple of 8-4 seasons, something like that, than it is that they're going to go 15 or 16-0 and win another national title. I'd be absolutely shocked if they beat Ohio State one more time in a row, never mind 3 more times in a row, and I don't think they're winning the Big Ten this year, probably not next year or the year after either. It was a great run that Michigan had. All runs come to an end. No matter what happens to Michigan this year going forward, doesn't take anything away from what Michigan accomplished, not really not just last year, but the last 3, 4, 5 years under Harbaugh, with all the Big Ten titles and wins over Ohio State, trips to the playoff, culminating in a national title last season. But if you talk about Michigan, particularly over the last 3 years, we'll go with 3 years, they're averaging 13 wins a year over the last 3 years. Are they going to average 13 wins a year over the next 3 to 5 years? I don't think they are. I think it's closer to 8 or 9, maybe 10. Again, this year, I think they may be okay. We'll see. But anyway, those are the two that I was able to come up with. Much harder for me to find the trending down teams, which is odd because normally, I like crapping on teams that I think are heading in the wrong direction or teams I think are going to be bad. And again, there's a lot of teams that I can look at and say, well, this team finished 4th last year, and there's no way they're finishing 4th this year. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for 5-year trends here. Teams that are going to be significantly or measurably worse over the next 5 years than they were the previous 5. So Clemson and Michigan is what I could come up with today. Again, I did this same video yesterday, but trending up. If you haven't watched that, just click back one video. 5 or 6 teams we talked about there in the trending up video: Miami, Nebraska, Tennessee, Texas A&M, Auburn, Virginia Tech, I think. But for the trending down, I've got Clemson and Michigan. All right, let me know down below. What do you think? Which teams do you think are heading in the wrong direction, trending down over the next 5 years? Let me know down below. Appreciate you watching. Have a good morning.